Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for being with us again for Tom Campbell Answers Your Questions. I have a question from Valerie from Poland. If we didn't experience any paranormal events, that may mean possibly we're not ready for those kinds of experiences, like children who are too young to use some expensive or dangerous objects. But you present this beat technique, which she's talking about the binaural beats, like an efficient technique to bring our consciousness into another state. Does this technique suit everybody, or can we experience only what we're ready for? Many thanks for your answer. I dream of experimenting with this technique, but I don't want to force anything. Everybody has his own rhythm and path in their spiritual development. So can you comment on that?
Sure. My first comment would be, don't let a concern that you may not be ready yet stand in your way of trying. In general, people don't really know when they're ready or when they're not ready. It's that they try and things either work out or they don't. Now, there could be two reasons. One, they're not trying properly or in the best way, or it could be that they're not ready yet. But don't say, well, maybe I shouldn't do this because what if I'm not ready? That's really not a good way to approach it. Just approach it. Do it. Do it. Try. And if it doesn't work for you, try it a different way. Try to approach it some other direction. And if it still doesn't work for you, and maybe you've tried it 3 or 4 different ways, then don't get frustrated. Just let it go, because then you're probably not quite ready for it. But that's how you find out that you're not ready for it, is by trying it as many ways as you can and seeing whether or not it works for you. Now, not being ready for it doesn't mean, necessarily that you haven't evolved enough to be ready for it. It may just be that your life is very busy, or that you happen to be in a part of your life where there's a lot of demands on you, or a lot of stress, or who knows, there could be all kinds of things going on that would get in the way of you experiencing paranormal things. And it may not be the quality of your consciousness at all. You just may need to relax and let go a little. And that may be why you're not ready, because you're not relaxed enough. You haven't let go enough. You haven't learned to develop your intuitive side enough. So the point is that you can learn. Part of the getting ready is opening yourself up and letting your intellect sit on the sidelines, develop your intuition. And these are things you can do with practice. So you can help get yourself ready. It's not just something that either you're ready or you're not, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can get yourself ready by working on these aspects. The point is, if you get frustrated, if you get to the point that you just don't seem to be able to get there, even though you've been working on it for 2 or 3 or 4 years, don't be frustrated. Just let it go. Maybe next year, try again. Maybe things will work. And again, not necessarily because you're not grown up enough, but because your situation will change. Your overall view of the world will change. You change all the time as you make choices and grow. So don't be shy. Get right in and try. See what happens. Try different ways. Now, binaural beats are not going to work for everybody. Some people, they will actually annoy more than help. Mostly these are people who are on one of the 2 extremes. They either already know how to meditate and don't need any aids, and they find the binaural beat kind of gets in the way. It forces them into a particular state, and they're used to just naturally finding the states they need to do whatever it is they need to do. So those are the ones who are more advanced. And then some on the opposite end, they won't work very well for, because those people cannot let go of their intellect. Their intellect is always in charge, always judging, always assessing, always analyzing, and they just can't seem to let go. Well, they listen to binaural beats, and they will probably help them somewhat, but it'll be kind of patchy, because as soon as that intellect gets back in there and starts to take charge, then they lose it. And then they come back, and then they lose it, and they keep going in and out, and they get very frustrated for that reason. So the people that the binaural beats will work for best are the people in between. And these people will find that if they just put on the binaural beat and then just let that beat be in the back of their mind, they don't have to pay attention to it. They don't really have to listen to it. Just let it be there. They can even ignore it entirely. And it will help put them into a good theta state, a good meditation state. So they are training wheels. The binaural beats are something that eventually, as you get more advanced and get better, that you should not use. You don't want to be taken to that state and held there. You want to be more flexible than that. You want to sample through multiple kinds of states, depending on what you're doing. And that binaural beat will just take you to that theta state and hold you in that theta state, which is a little limiting when you're more of an advanced user. But when you're a new user, it's wonderful, because you can only get there and stay there for 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and you drift away. And then you come back, and another couple of minutes, you drift away again. And it's really hard to stay focused there for, say, 50 minutes or an hour. And the binaural beats will do that for you. It will take you to that state almost immediately and hold you there nice and steadily so you can work on things. So the hundreds of people that I've been around who, they were listening to binaural beats, usually binaural beats that I have made, most of them, the great majority of them, find the beats very helpful. A few find them annoying, and a few, I think it probably, they would range, or the larger group in the middle will range from, they help a little to they help a whole lot. I can't do it without them. So you'll probably be in that middle group. But again, don't get frustrated with the binaural beats or anything else. If things don't work out well, we'll just give it a little break and come back to it and try again and keep doing that. This is a process that will take years to develop, not just something that you expect to do in a week. So take the long view and just work at it without pressure, without expectation, without having a need to get a particular result, because those things are what will keep you from getting any results. So just do it with a light heart, and let's see what happens, if anything, and just be open to it. And that's when things work. If, I really want to do this, I really want to experience this, and you have a lot of anticipation and expectation, that will prevent you from being able to stay in that intuitive state. That the intellect will get hold of that and want to make it work. And you can't make it work. You have to let it work. You don't go chase it down. You just open yourself and it comes to you.
Well, Tom, you were mentioning that for the most part, and a lot of times you talk about the general curve. It has some good benefits from light to really wonderful. And that those who already know this technique of meditation and reaching point consciousness, it wouldn't necessarily help. This is how I felt when I invited some of our friends to Lumley Castle, who are, I think there were around 5 psychics that were there. I thought they came to the castle to because they were always helping us with different things over a decade. And I was wondering whether their experience would be significant or not, having already done this professionally, reaching point consciousness and working as,
Mhm.
say, a psychic or a psychic medium. Um, what would they experience with this? I was a little bit skeptical about that, but most of them found a very profound experience with it. As you say, it holds you in a certain place. And one person who works as a psychic medium was, in fact, held in a place and shown a particular lesson that was very significant that she would not have otherwise been able to experience exactly that same way. So it was quite interesting. And then on the other hand, mentioning those with that are more left brain, highly intelligent person um, has been trying for a couple of years to make a breakthrough with the binaural beats. And when he joined the global healing that we do every month here at MBT events, that he had actually a breakthrough. So that
Mhm.
was this was Ralph, and Marla was the one who
Mhm.
experienced the binaural beats in a significant way. And Hillary, who has since passed away, was at Lumley Castle, and she used the binaural beats as an artist. She was walking through the woods and experiencing the binaural beats, giving input, visual input that she could use for her art. So on the opposite ends there, on the small, and it's a small margin, there are interesting things that happen with these binaural
Mhm.
beats.
Mhm. I think when people who are who have already mastered doing a few specific paranormal things, like being a medium, like Marla, um, they tend to do things in a very narrow, focused way. They have certain skills that they've learned, and they use those. And when they're using those, they're very, very good at it. You know, they're excellent, but they haven't really branched out just to the breadth of all the possibilities of the things that can be done. They've always just done this one thing, like a medium. They talk to dead people. Well, they've always had this connection with people psychically. But when they start looking at the paranormal in a much broader way, I think that opens doors that before, it's not like those doors were locked. Those doors were always sitting there open. They just didn't know the door was there or to grab hold of it and go through it. They just never saw that as a possibility. So yes, even people who are very accomplished at some paranormal skills often get a lot out of the binaural beat and the concepts that are in the My Big Toe, because it's such a broad thing that encompasses a lot more than just talking to dead people or something specific like that. So yes, I do remember that. That was some years back, but um, Laura Houston was also in that group, another psychic that was there. And I think all three of them got a lot out of it and thought that it kind of, pushed their game up a notch that they hadn't achieved before. But most of that, I think, was just opening to new ideas and new experiences rather than just continue to tread on the paths that were familiar to them. And it'll do that for everybody. That's one of the big changers. One of the growth factors in doing paranormal things is that it opens your mind. It opens you to other possibilities. And just opening to bigger possibilities, it's how can we say it? That it's like travel. People who travel the world, they're just open. They have a bigger. We say they're more sophisticated, but it's not just sophistication. You just experience more. They've seen more things, more probabilities. They have bigger views and bigger pictures. And people who've never traveled at all, who've just always lived in the same spot, well, we call them provincial. They just have a very provincial view. And they don't have real big pictures because they haven't had such a broad experience base. Well, it's the same way when you start exploring the larger consciousness system. Suddenly now you're a traveler. You've been places and done things. You've experienced all sorts of things you didn't even know were there. And what it does is it opens new possibilities and doorways. And you begin to see even the small things in your life, the everyday things that are right in your own little neighborhood. You start to see them with this larger perspective. And that changes who you are. That's why doing the paranormal things, though doing something paranormal is not particularly valuable in and of itself, but the process of doing things that are paranormal, it's a process that will help expand your possibilities and expand your understanding. You see the world in a bigger context. And that's really the point of it. You know, paranormal is not a big deal, or it's not even particularly useful just by itself. To do things paranormal just because you can do them is really of no interest. But doing those things actually makes people grow up because it gives them bigger pictures, just like travel makes people grow up. You know, if you've been to 100 different countries and not just been through their airports, but actually, you know, spent time there, lived there, got to know the people, you will be a different person than if you've never gotten further than 20 miles away from where you were born. You know, those two people are just very different people. And it works the same way with consciousness. People who travel consciousness end up with being more sophisticated is really a poor choice of words. It's not that. They just are more aware of possibilities. They have a larger decision space. And when you have that bigger picture, it actually changes how you interpret the little picture that you're in. That big picture experience makes that little picture seem totally different than it was when you don't have that big picture experience. So that's really where we want to go with this. It's not just, you know, get out there and do those paranormal things. It's expand your mind and grow up, you know, become love, see the world as a place that we all share, that we all interact. See us all as part of a bigger thing, rather than all just a bunch of individuals each trying to, you know, get their own way. It's not like that. So that's the advantage of it.
That's a really nice way to put it, and that's the real benefit to them. Experiencing more of the larger reality and the different things available to you is very helpful in seeing the bigger picture and how we are all connected, how these are not just gifts for a certain type of people who have natural gifts. There's one lady in the MBT community that I'm thinking of now, who was gifted as a psychic from very early on, but found that all of the other things that you can do with consciousness, and such as remote viewing and other things like that, were available to her that she never considered she would be very proficient at. And it turned out that she was. And so you expanded the experience base of someone who had been naturally gifted and experiencing these things all of her life. So these things are available to us as consciousness, and whether these binaural beats will help you or not is something you just have to experiment with.
Exactly.
All right, we'll go on to the next question. Something you're familiar with. This next question deals with debugging and game development. Tom, in MBT, you wrote about how you checked your early programs for bugs using a sort of meditative state. I'm working on a video game and I'm getting close to the beta testing phase. Do you have any advice on how to approach that to possibly get the game bug-free? additional question. I spent a lot of time on this game, 16 years and 10,000 hours, and I somehow feel that it was something like my purpose to do this. I don't really know how it all happened. I just had to do it. And I'm wondering whether it is in any way profitable for the system for people to do such work. So from an MBT perspective, does it lower entropy in any way? Because on the other hand, during all that time, I was not a very social person. And I'm not sure whether the game is not more of an excuse to bury myself in work and not be confronted with social situations. Although I consider myself an introvert, I'm questioning whether I'd want to live like that in the future and possibly make another game. So thank you. So first question, do you have any advice on how to approach getting that game bug-free?
Yeah, sure. The way I did it is I looked at basically the printout. You can print out your program. So the computer prints out all the statements that you've put into it. And when you run the program, it will get to a point where it hits a bug, an error. And when it hits that error, it will do something that you don't want it to do, because that's the definition of an error. It does something, sometimes it bombs and stops, but it may just go to the wrong place or get lost, or there's all sorts of things that can cause errors. Well, what I did is I looked at my code in my mind, and I saw that listing, that computer printout. And then I started scrolling through it, or if you like, you say just going down the page if you want, but computer printouts all on bifold paper that goes on forever. It's like one really, really, really long sheet of paper. So I thought of that more as a scroll. So it was rolled up on one side and I was looking at it go by. And I made the intent that those lines of code that had errors in them would be red. And I'd let it scroll by until I'd see a little red go by. And then I'd stop it and rewind a bit. And I'd look at that red line and I'd remember it, because I wrote the code just like him. He's written the code, so he knows every line that's in there. He can recognize it and he knows where it is and what it's doing. So I look at it and I just remembered, I go and find the next one. And if I'd find 4 or 5 of them, then next time I was up this is back in the bad old days with punch cards. When I was back with my punch cards, I'd pull those cards out and look at them. And maybe I'd forgotten to put a semicolon at the end of the statement. That was back in goodness, the middle to late 1960s. So I was on a Burroughs machine programming in Algol. None of that even exists anymore, but anyhow, so we had our syntax and stuff that we needed to have, and I'd find errors like that. And sometimes I'd find a card that didn't seem to have errors in it, but indeed I'd find that it did have an error because the hole in the card wasn't punched quite correctly. These card punches are mechanical things, and like all mechanical things, sometimes they move, they bend, they warp, they get out of line, and the hole would be punched just a little bit off center. So that when the card reader saw it, it was confused. It didn't know what to do with it because it was only looking at maybe half a hole or, something like that. I don't know exactly what the card reader problem was, but it would bomb. So it could find those kinds of errors as well. It wasn't just programming errors, it was errors, things that, that made the program not run. So that's one way, just let them scroll by in your mind and have some way, have a light blink or a bell ring or, be in red font or something. Just, these are all tools. Just make up tools in your mind. You could just look at the printout and do the same thing. You could look at a printout and expect the line to suddenly kind of jump out at you or get bigger or change color or something. So these are all tools for helping focus the mind. So come up with a tool set that suits you and your metaphors and just practice with it. Now you have to get into a good intuitive state. Obviously, this goes on in the intuitive side of your consciousness, not in the intellectual side. So you have to keep that intellect from interfering. Otherwise, the intellect will just nag you to death, trying to be in charge and judge what's going on. And that just won't work. Your intellect can't get right answers. Your intellect's just guessing. We don't want to guess. We want the intuition to know, where the problems are. So that's how I suggest doing it. Come up with your own tools for deciding which ones are a problem. Sometimes people do it with their eyes shut. They'll move their finger on a page and, they feel something there. It's not quite right. So then they'll move it back across it again. They'll move it up and back. Oh, yeah, they got it again. So just by touch, they'll find a line. So there's all sorts of metaphors you can use to find the line. You could maybe even, all the lines are numbered. You could even look for numbers. See if the system would just give you line numbers. That would be another way that you would do it. So some metaphors will be easier for you than others. So play with them and spend at least 2 or 3 weeks on each metaphor just to assess how good you and that metaphor are working together.
So this meditative state, this person is acquainted with your MBT theory.
Mm-hmm.
And so this meditative state is very practical, reaching point consciousness and using your intent, using your own tool set to develop a way to discover what might be wrong in this program.
Right. Well, basically, we're getting data out of the database. There's data in the database, and we're getting that data, and we're making up a output format. My output format was, red lines against a scrolled up, computer paper. But that's just my output format. So I say you can make your own metaphors for the output format to suit you. But it's a matter of getting data out of the database. And why would the errors in my program be in the database? Well, this is a virtual reality. The computer I was running it on, that Burroughs computer, that was a virtual computer. That computer was created with information, just like my body was created with information. So the system had modeled, all that stuff was modeled. So it knew exactly what went wrong, where, and why, because it had to model that too. You see, this is a virtual reality. So all of that is in the system. In order for that system to make a computer, it's a virtual computer, right? In a virtual reality, just like if your Sims character had a computer, that would be a virtual computer. And I don't mean a virtual machine, which is a little different. That's a computer inside of a computer. But anyway, it had to be made. The process had to be gone through. It had to decide where was the logical inconsistency. There. And then it had to decide what would the machine do with that logical inconsistency. Oh, well, the job would stop running. That sort of thing. So the system's already been through all of that. So it knows exactly what's going on because it has to render this world. It has to render that computer. It has to render your cards. You had to render the card punch. It has to render the guy putting the cards into the reader. It has to render the reader reading the lines, and it has to look at the logic and do all that. It's a virtual reality. So it knows. All you have to do is go collect the information.
Moving on to his second question. So from an MBT perspective, is developing these games, does it lower entropy in any way?
Well, it can. It depends, It depends on the person and how they are interacting with whatever task they're doing. If he's working on this computer game and he is ignoring everything else in his life, then it could still be lowering entropy. He may be getting great satisfaction and there may be something there that he just has to do. Maybe he just has to prove to himself that he can do it. Maybe he just, needs to have a very long attention span. Maybe that's what he's trying to learn, trying to stick to a task until he gets it done. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can say that would be positive. On the other hand, it could be that he's just doing it to escape from something that he doesn't like or feels kind of cold and prickly to him, which is maybe relationships with other people. In which case, then he's not engaging in those challenges. He's engaging a different challenge. Well, you get all kinds of challenges. You work the challenges as you get to them. If he has a challenge to see whether or not he can stick with a program for, a job for 10 years to get a result, and he just has to do that because he really has to learn about consistency and a long attention span and sticking with it, not quitting early. If that's what he's trying to learn, then that's a good lesson and he can learn that lesson. If that's not something he needs to learn, he's just hiding from social encounters, then that's something he doesn't need to do. So you see, it just depends on who he is and his intention. What's his intention? What's his motivation for doing what he does? And then he mentions that, of course, you change. You grow up. So now maybe he needed this time alone to work alone so he could get himself together to the point that he was ready to go out and interact socially. And now he's gotten to that point and he says, I don't know if I want to do this again because it kept me tied up and out of social circulation. So I'm not sure I want to do that. Well, he may decide to work some of those challenges in the social world and work on that. And he might go back to the programming or he might not. But the point is, all of it could be very positive. All of it could be not so positive. It just depends on your intention. What was your intent? Is your intent to hide, or is your intent to prove to yourself that you can stick it out to the end, that you're not going to stop projects in the middle? Maybe that's been a problem you've had for the last 4 or 5 lifetimes. You maybe keep jumping from one thing to another and never actually felt like you accomplished anything. And this time, by George, you're not going to do that. You're going to get this done. And maybe that's what's driving you. Who knows? You see, you don't want to second guess any of this stuff. You just do what you need to do. Work with an open mind toward what are your intentions? Why am I doing this? And if the reason is, well, I just feel I need to, well, then continue, do it. That's what you feel you need to. There's probably some reason why you need to do that. And other things can wait. You've got your whole lifetime, every other things can wait. But then when it comes to the point that you don't need to do that anymore, and these other things now are looking more interesting, well, then go do them. Maybe you can do some of each. You might find that balance where you can work only, 5 or 6 hours a day and spend time interacting with people the other parts of the day. But you will no doubt find that interacting with people challenge to be a bigger challenge. It has problems in it that you can't solve. When you're doing codes, you can always solve the problem. It might take you a few weeks or a few months to figure out how, but you can always solve the problem. Even if you can't solve it directly, you can find a way to work around it. So dealing with people, that's not true. Sometimes you can't solve the problem. Sometimes you just have to let the problem be. Either accept it as it is, or walk away from it and let it be. It's a whole different thing. And you'll learn a whole different set of skills and understanding by dealing with people. But you also learn a whole different set of skills and understanding by immersing yourself in computer programming too. There's skills and things to learn there. So it's not that one's a bad idea and the other's a good idea. It's wherever you feel kind of a pull to go there. But put the same kind of energy and stick-to-itiveness in these social relationships as you did into your programming. See, so you take what you learn in the programming and now apply it down here in the social part. All right, the first couple of social adventures were liable to not work out too well. That's typically the way it is with social interactions. You learn by trial and error, and you will, run into all sorts of different kind of people that'll challenge you in different ways. So realizing that and realizing that you can't always fix things, no matter how hard you try, they're just unfixable. People are not to be fixed. They're to be appreciated as they are for the most part. So it's just all different. So I'd say just go ahead, mix it up, do one, do the other, do both. Follow your intuition of what you think you need to be doing. So don't look back and say, oh man, did I waste my life, just doing programming? That's not so. You got something out of that. And besides the finished program, you got something else out of it. Something made you grow during that process. Maybe you needed that much isolation just to appreciate that social, element to yourself. It may have taken you that long to appreciate that. So everything happens in its own way and in its own time. Be kind to yourself and just apply what you've learned. Stick-to-itiveness, relentlessness, focus. Take all those and apply them to the social place, but not in a problem-solving mood, but rather than just an experiencing mood.
I think you've structured that answer very well, Tom. I should point out that because he's coming from your MBT theory, your theory says this is a social system. And he was questioning how profitable this is for the system to do such work. And it seems that you have touched on all of those aspects of it and answered it very well. So I hope that helps.
Almost everything can be profitable, or even very profitable. It just depends on your intent, your motivation. Why are you doing it, and what are you learning from it? You can't learn everything at once. Often you have to learn this lesson before you can learn the next lesson. So we learn by looking backwards for the most part. We learn by doing and experiencing, then looking back and seeing, how did that play out? What were the lessons there, and did I learn them?
Well, he felt there was a purpose to this, that it's something he had to do. And it's interesting that he asked you how to proceed with checking a bug in the game, and that's something that you did. So all the best to you and your game. He's submitted the question from the MBT forum, Dependent Chaos. So thank you for your answer, Tom.
MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.